What if everything you believed about aging was wrong? Betty Harper squinted against the low Arkansas sun as she waited by the cracked bench near the corner of Magnolia and 3rd, watching the number 14 bus cough and hiss around the bend like it was tired of running loops through forgotten neighborhoods. Her knees ached, not from injury, just from time, from gravity doing its work for too many years. She shifted her weight. The breeze tugged at her cardigan. Cars passed by, sleek and silent, like the world was being slowly taken over by something smoother, faster, younger. Her own car sat 3 blocks away, a '98 Buick LeSabre with a rusted fender and a failing transmission, but she couldn't afford the repair and couldn't justify the replacement. She tapped her phone. Nothing. The screen was smudged, cracked in the corner. She wasn't sure why she opened it, force of habit maybe. A notification blinked up from a news app she never remembered downloading. Tesla releases breakthrough full self-driving beta, Musk says, soon, your car will drive better than you ever could. Betty raised an eyebrow. Better than me, huh? She muttered to herself, then caught her reflection in the bus stop glass, creased face, wind-blown hair, tired eyes, and wondered if he might be right. She'd been feeling like a passenger in her own life for years now. Retirement hadn't brought peace. It had brought silence. Her days felt like background noise. She used to work at O'Connell's Auto, back when carburetors were still a thing and people respected your hands if they had grease under the nails. Back when folks came to her for advice on spark plugs and fan belts. Now everything had a touchscreen and a "consult your app" sticker. No one wanted advice from a 67-year-old woman who hadn't kept up. Her daughter Susan had called last week, mostly to remind her to take her blood pressure meds and to say she was busy this weekend. Susan always said that now. Busy. Grandkids Betty had barely seen in person. They lived in Dallas. Tech people. Fast talkers. Like another language. She'd given up trying to keep up. Until today. The article opened without her touching anything. Video autoplayed. Elon Musk was talking, standing in front of a sleek silver Model S that shimmered under stage lights. His voice had that odd calm, confident, curious, like he was talking to people already living 10 years from now. If you can imagine a world where age doesn't slow down progress, he said, then you can be part of building it, at any age. Betty blinked. The line was so direct it almost felt personal. The bus arrived. The brakes screeched. Betty didn't move. The driver looked at her. She shook her head slowly. He gave her a quick nod and pulled away. She stood there, watching the dust swirl in the sunlight, a strange flutter beginning in her chest, not quite excitement, not quite fear, but something. Possibility, maybe. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from, Musk's voice continued on the video, now crackling through her tiny phone speaker. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Betty almost laughed. She'd watched plenty of videos where people talked big, promised revolutions, solutions, salvation. She'd seen enough snake oil in her time. But something about the way he said it, like he wasn't promising anything, just daring you to keep going, struck her. She hadn't felt dared in a long time. She walked home instead of calling a ride. Each step felt heavier and lighter at once, like something was uncoiling inside her. She thought of her garage, mostly full of boxes now, and the old red toolbox with the dented lid still sitting under the bench. She hadn't opened it in nearly a decade. Her husband, Roger, had always teased her for keeping it. "You're more stubborn than that torque wrench," he'd say. That torque wrench was still in there, somewhere. Roger was not. 5 years now since the stroke. She unlocked the front door and stood in the entryway, letting the quiet hit her like it always did. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old wood. Pictures lined the hallway, Susan as a toddler, Roger on their road trip to Montana, Betty in overalls next to the engine of the Dodge she rebuilt in '84. She paused on that one. She looked young. Sharp-eyed. Capable. That version of her felt like a different species. Betty walked to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and set it on the stove. The ticking of the burner igniting was the loudest sound in the house. She pulled out her iPad from the drawer under the mail pile. It still worked, sort of. Took a minute to boot up. She searched Tesla self-driving for seniors. Mostly tech blogs and news stories. Some skeptical. Some raving. One article mentioned a woman in Florida who bought a Tesla at 82 and used full self-driving to visit her sister 300 miles away. Another talked about a retirement community where FSD cars were being tested to replace shuttle buses. Betty kept reading, tea forgotten. At some point, she found herself on Tesla's site. Sleek videos, clean design. She scrolled through specs she didn't fully understand. Autopilot. Sensors. Neural nets. Beta programs. It was like a sci-fi movie, except it was real and happening now. She leaned back, tablet resting on her stomach, and let her eyes close. The clock ticked. Somewhere down the block, a lawnmower started. Her hand still rested on the device. Her mind wandered to the old car in the driveway. She wondered what it would feel like to not have to grip the wheel so tightly, to trust something else to keep her steady. She wondered if that applied to more than just driving. The next morning, she found herself Googling the nearest Tesla showroom. Closest one was 40 miles away. It felt ridiculous. It felt thrilling. She'd need a ride. Or maybe she'd rent something. Figure it out. That word, figure, made her smile. It had always been her word. Back in the day, she could figure out anything. Radio problems. Fuel lines. People. She'd just forgotten that part of herself. Suppressed it. Let it rust. But it was still there. Somewhere under the layers. She looked again at the photo on the wall. Her, 29, standing in front of the Dodge, sun in her hair, wrench in hand, smudges on her cheek like war paint. She didn't feel like that woman right now. But she wanted to. For the first time in years, she really wanted to. And maybe, just maybe, that was the moment it all changed. Before the walls got quiet and the phone stopped ringing, before her body began negotiating every movement with creaks and protests, before the world put older, before woman, like a warning label, Betty Harper was something else entirely. She was a firebrand in a flannel shirt with grease under her nails and an engine block in the garage that she knew like her own heartbeat. Spring of '84, she was 29, fresh off a messy breakup and halfway through rebuilding a 1970 Dodge Charger from the scrap heap of someone else's failed project. She'd never felt more alive than when she was underneath that car, music blaring from the radio, wind pushing through the open garage door, socket wrench in hand and sweat streaking down her neck. She had dreams then, real, wild ones. Opening her own garage. Teaching other women how to fix cars. Proving wrong every man who told her it wasn't lady work. But dreams don't pay the mortgage. And they don't soothe a crying baby. Life happened fast, and it didn't ask for her permission. She met Roger that fall. Kind man. Big heart. Liked jazz and old westerns. He had strong hands and gentler eyes, and he never mocked her for loving machines. When she got pregnant with Susan, they married in a hurry. The Charger never got finished. It sat in the garage like a monument to something paused, not dead, but frozen in amber. For a while, Betty told herself she'd get back to it. After the baby. After the bills settled. After the job at the auto parts store became stable enough to let her cut hours. But after has a way of vanishing into never. One day bled into the next. The garage became storage. The tools gathered dust. Roger went back to school and became a CPA. Susan grew tall and opinionated. Betty worked the counter at O'Connell's for 26 years. She knew every gasket and hose that passed through that register. Customers called her Betty Wrench, a name she liked more than she admitted. But selling parts isn't the same as building something. It was proximity, not purpose. And eventually, even that ended. The new owner automated the inventory. Fewer humans needed. Betty was thanked, handed a card, and sent home. Retirement, they called it. Time to relax, they said. As if she'd been holding her breath for decades, waiting for the sweet relief of doing nothing. But nothing is its own kind of wait. She spent the first year of retirement painting walls, organizing photos, baking muffins. It wasn't unhappy, just directionless. Like floating. Her husband passed quietly in his sleep 3 years ago. Stroke. No warning. One night she heard the cat meowing at the bedroom door, and when she got there, Roger was gone. After the funeral, Susan stayed for 2 nights, then flew back to her life, work, kids, deadlines. "Call me if you need anything," she'd said, kissing her mother's cheek like she was visiting a fragile historical site. Betty didn't call. Not really. Not unless something broke. They talked every few weeks, but it always felt like reading a script. Weather. Health. Groceries. Repeat. Betty's house grew still, like a stage after the play had ended. The refrigerator hummed. The faucet dripped. The days blurred. Sometimes she forgot what day it was until the trash truck came. The photo on the hallway wall, the one of her in her 20s, mocked her on the way to the kitchen each morning. That version of herself was frozen in purpose, wild with confidence. Betty had started avoiding it. Pretending she didn't see the way her reflection in the frame's glass had drifted further from the girl in the picture. She had notebooks filled with lists, groceries, chores, maintenance, birthdays, but nothing aspirational. Her last real ambition had been finding a better garden hose. She once saw a YouTube video about an 88-year-old woman who hiked the Appalachian Trail. Another about a man who learned coding at 72 and started his own app. Betty clicked away from both before they finished. Too good to be real. Or maybe too real for comfort. Her heart still clenched when she saw someone her age doing something bold. It wasn't envy exactly, it was grief, maybe, for the self she'd left behind. There was a day, she remembered it sharply, when Susan came over to help her with her phone. Betty had accidentally signed up for 3 streaming services and couldn't figure out how to cancel any of them. Susan had sat at the table, breezing through apps and settings like she was disarming a bomb. "You know, Mom," she'd said without looking up, "maybe you should stop signing up for things. It's just a lot for you to keep track of." The words weren't meant cruelly, but they hit like a slap. Betty had nodded, lips tight. Said nothing. Just felt the slow cement pour in her gut, the feeling of being dismissed, reduced, filed away as irrelevant. That moment became a turning point she didn't talk about. A quiet resignation. Like she was waiting out the clock. Some nights she'd sit in the garage, in the old chair that used to face the charger before they sold it for parts. She'd imagine the scent of engine oil and gasoline, the clatter of tools. She'd close her eyes and pretend she still remembered how to rebuild a carburetor. She did. She just didn't think anyone would care. Her body had changed, yes, slower, stiffer, more easily tired. But her mind still sparked when she read something interesting. When she heard a story about innovation. She liked understanding how things worked. The world made her feel like that interest had an expiration date. Like curiosity was a young person's sport. But it hadn't left her. It had just gone underground. Waiting. When she first saw the Elon Musk headline, it wasn't because she believed in self-driving cars or cutting-edge tech. It was because she recognized that look in his eye during the video, the same one she used to have when she figured out how to rebuild a brake system using leftover parts and a soldering iron. Musk didn't look like he was trying to sell a product. He looked like he was chasing something. That look, that hunger to build something new, stirred a part of her that hadn't moved in years. She thought of how he said it, "You can be part of building it, at any age." It didn't sound like a slogan. It sounded like a dare. Betty had been dared before. By teachers. By bosses. By every man who asked if she was just helping out in the garage. She always met those dares with a raised eyebrow and rolled up sleeves. But no one had dared her in years. No one had even suggested she could try something new. That world had shut its doors. But now, here was one creaking open. The next morning, she wandered into the garage, past the paint cans and cardboard boxes, and opened the old red toolbox. The scent hit her immediately: metal, oil, time. She ran her fingers over the wrenches, the sockets, the small notes Roger had scrawled on masking tape inside the lid. They were heavier than she remembered. Or maybe she was just out of practice. She picked up the torque wrench. The one Roger teased her about. She cradled it like a relic. Then, without thinking, she took it to the workbench, cleared a space, and laid it down. The act felt ceremonial. Like a beginning. She stood there staring at the workbench, arms limp at her sides, the torque wrench lying still on the stained wood like an artifact dug up from a younger life. A shaft of light broke through the high window and landed across her fingers, catching the silver ring Roger gave her 38 years ago, now worn so thin the band felt like paper. Her hands didn't look like a mechanic's hands anymore. Not tough, not quick. The veins showed more than the knuckles. Skin like tissue. She squeezed the wrench just to feel it bite into her palm. Then she whispered, "What am I doing?" She let out a small laugh, not the warm kind, but the self-defensive kind, the sound people make when they think they're being foolish and want to say it before someone else does. It echoed a little in the garage. She hadn't realized how quiet this room had become. That silence used to mean focus. Now it just meant no one was listening. She put the wrench down and rubbed her forehead. She wasn't trying to start a project. Not really. She didn't even know what the project was. It wasn't about the wrench or the garage. It was something deeper and harder to name. Something that hurt when she touched it. She remembered the last time she'd even tried to talk about this. It was 2 Christmases ago. Susan had brought the grandkids, little blurs of energy, and they'd all been crammed into the living room with wrapping paper flying and music on too loud. At some point, after everyone had eaten, Betty had said, almost to herself, "You know, I still think about opening a little garage. Just a small one. For women who want to learn basic car stuff." Susan hadn't even looked up from her phone. She just said, "Mom, you should be relaxing. You're retired." That was it. The way she said it, like ambition was a diagnosis, something to monitor, not encourage. Betty had gone quiet after that. She didn't want to be laughed at. Or worse, ignored. That's the one that cuts the deepest, being ignored. Not out of cruelty, but dismissal. Like your furniture. Useful once, but no longer worth notice. She walked back inside the house and filled the kettle, her movements slower than usual. She didn't want to feel like this. Didn't want to want something. Because wanting meant risk. It meant disappointment. It meant realizing you might not be the person you once were. That thought hit her hard: what if I'm not her anymore? The woman in the photo. The woman under the charger. The woman who built things. What if that part of her was just gone? She made tea. Sat at the kitchen table. Turned on the little TV mounted under the cabinet, just for background noise. Some cable news segment was playing. Talking heads, arguing about AI and job automation. One man's voice cut through the others. Calm. Unshaken. Elon Musk. Betty blinked. She leaned in. "We're not trying to replace humans," he said. "We're trying to free them." Let machines handle the boring stuff, the dangerous stuff. So people can do more of what makes them human. Another voice interrupted, but what about older workers? People being left behind? Musk didn't flinch. People don't get left behind because of age. They get left behind because we assume they're done growing. That assumption is wrong. At any age, you can learn. At any age, you can lead. Betty froze. She didn't know why, but her eyes welled up suddenly. Not from the words exactly, but from how he said them. There was no pity in his voice. No condescension. Just certainty. Like he actually believed it. Like he wasn't talking to a demographic. He was talking to her. A pulse thumped in her temple. Her hands trembled, not with age, but with something close to fear. Hope, maybe. Dangerous hope. She turned off the TV. Sat in the quiet. Musk's words repeated in her mind. We assume they're done growing. That assumption is wrong. She grabbed a notebook from the drawer and opened it to a blank page. For a long time, she just stared at it. Then she wrote a single word, grow. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake staring at the ceiling fan turning slow above her bed, each rotation ticking like a second hand. She kept thinking about the word. Grow. What does that even mean when you're 67? Grow into what? Toward what? She closed her eyes and imagined her hands on an engine again. Not the old kind. Not pistons and carburetors. But something new. Something electric. Clean. Precise. Like a Tesla. She'd never even sat in one. They seemed like science fiction to her. The idea of a car driving itself, what was that even like? Was it real? Was it safe? She didn't know. But she wanted to. The next morning, she found herself on YouTube. First it was car reviews. Then videos of people testing Tesla's full self-driving mode. Then tutorials. Then Elon Musk interviews. She watched one where he talked about coding PayPal on a borrowed computer at night, sleeping under his desk, risking everything. You have to decide, he said, if you're going to be driven by fear or curiosity. That line hit her like a jolt. Fear or curiosity. That's what it was. That's what had been pulling at her chest for weeks. Fear had been in the driver's seat. For years. Since Roger died. Since retirement. Since Susan told her to take it easy. Curiosity had been locked in the trunk. Betty clicked pause. Closed the laptop. Sat back in her chair. Her mind raced, heart pounding. She remembered something else, a moment from years ago, working at O'Connell's. A teenage boy came in asking about a distributor cap for his dad's truck. He was nervous, didn't even know what part he needed. The guy behind the counter shrugged, ready to move on. But Betty walked him through it. Took him to the shelves, showed him the part, even explained how to install it. His face lit up. He said, "You're like a mechanic whisperer or something." She hadn't thought about that moment in years. She used to love explaining how things worked. The way people's eyes lit up when they understood. She didn't just like fixing things. She liked teaching them. Her tea had gone cold. She dumped it out, filled the kettle again, all in a daze. She didn't feel like a mechanic. Not now. She felt like an engine that hadn't been turned over in years. Couldn't know if it would run unless she tried. That afternoon, she drove her Buick, the old beast, down to the public library. Signed up for a free course on electric vehicles through the community college extension. The clerk looked at her with surprise. "This one's mostly younger folks," she said. "You sure you want this one?" Betty smiled, steady. "I'm not here to audit. I'm here to learn." She walked out with the syllabus in her hand and something like electricity in her step. She wasn't sure where this would lead. She didn't have a plan. But she had a pull, like gravity, and she was tired of sitting still. That night, back in her garage, she opened the toolbox again. Dug until she found the small circuit board kit she'd bought at a yard sale years ago and never used. Still in plastic. She peeled off the wrapper, cleared off the bench, and turned on the old desk lamp. She didn't know what she was doing. She didn't care. She was doing it anyway. Somewhere, deep inside, the engine turned over. A cough. A hum. A spark. The day she almost bought the cane was the day she realized she was teetering on the edge of giving in. It wasn't dramatic. Just a quiet moment in aisle 7 of the local pharmacy, between the compression socks and the blood pressure monitors. She'd gone in for shampoo and vitamins. Her knees had been talking back for weeks, more sharply than usual, especially in the morning. A sign by the end cap read, "Don't wait until it's too late, support your stride now." The canes were sleek, modern even. Not the clunky wooden kind her grandfather used. One had a matte black finish with a curved ergonomic handle. She held it. Lightweight. Strong. It felt like surrender in her hand. She imagined herself walking into the community center with it. Imagined Susan seeing her with it. Imagined that quiet look of concern, the careful way people start to treat you when they think you're fragile. She hated that look. The cane wasn't the problem. It was what it represented, permission to stop trying. Permission to slow down and not come back. She put it down. Not because her knees didn't hurt. But because she wanted to believe she could still strengthen them. The next aisle over had home fitness gear, those rubber resistance bands in bright neon colors, a set of ankle weights. On impulse, she bought a pack of the bands, a stretching guide, and a water bottle with "Crush Your Goals" printed on the side in obnoxious pink lettering. She half laughed when it rang up. What kind of 67-year-old woman starts a workout routine based on a slogan printed on a bottle? She did, apparently. She started the very next morning. Just 10 minutes. A couple of stretches. A few wobbly leg lifts in the living room while the morning news murmured in the background. Nothing heroic. Just movement. But that first move broke the seal. That same afternoon, she watched another Elon Musk clip, this one not in a suit, not on stage, but walking through a Tesla factory floor, talking casually to an engineer about recalibrating camera feeds to reduce edge case errors. The camera was shaky, the audio muffled, but Betty watched it 3 times. He looked completely absorbed. Fully alive. Not perfect. But in it. And not once did he mention being tired or too busy or too old. He didn't filter his ambition through age or expectation. He just acted. Built. Adjusted. Moved forward. Betty closed the tab, grabbed a pen, and made a list of what she still wanted to understand. It wasn't long. Just 6 things. 1. How self-driving actually works. 2. What sensors a Tesla uses. 3. Can I test one? 4. How safe is it, really? 5. What are the benefits for older drivers? 6. What would Roger say? That last one made her swallow hard. Roger had always been the steady one, the patient counterweight to her fire. He'd probably raise an eyebrow, give her that sideways smile of his, and say, "Let me know when I need to buckle up." She imagined him now, in the passenger seat of a self-driving car, hands on his lap, whistling a tune, trusting her completely. That image steadied her more than she expected. By Friday, she was on the phone with the Tesla dealership 43 miles away. "Hi," she said, voice surprisingly firm, "I'm interested in scheduling a test drive." The man on the other end sounded polite but surprised. "Of course. First time with us?" "Yes," she said. "First time for a lot of things lately." She almost hung up after making the appointment. Her heart was racing. What was she thinking? Driving out there? Sitting in some high-tech spaceship of a car? What if she didn't understand the controls? What if they looked at her like a relic? But the thought of not going felt worse. Like giving up before the engine even turned over. She pulled her old car out of the driveway the next morning, hands tight on the wheel, the transmission wheezing in protest. The radio only picked up static, so she turned it off and drove in silence, letting the rhythm of the tires calm her nerves. The Tesla showroom was gleaming white glass and brushed metal, like a spaceship had landed in the middle of strip mall suburbia. She sat in the parking lot for a full minute before going in. Inside, it smelled like new plastic and polished chrome. A young woman, maybe 22, with a tablet in her hand and shoes that probably cost more than Betty's entire outfit, greeted her with a smile. "Welcome. Are you here for a drive?" Betty nodded, trying to match the enthusiasm. "Betty Harper. I called earlier." The woman tapped her tablet. "Got you right here. You'll be with Jared today. He'll bring the Model Y around." Betty followed her outside. The sun hit the Tesla's curved body like a spotlight on stage. It looked less like a car and more like a sculpture. The door handle popped out as Jared approached, grinning like a high school quarterback. "Ready for something different?" he asked. "You have no idea," Betty muttered, climbing in. The cabin was silent. No engine noise. Just the soft whoosh of air conditioning and the hum of electronics. The massive touchscreen glowed to life, displaying maps, data, camera angles. Jared walked her through the basics. Regenerative braking. Autopilot mode. Lane assist. It was like learning to drive all over again, except the car was smarter than most people she knew. She took the wheel. The ride was smoother than anything she'd felt in years. It was like floating. When Jared activated the self-driving mode on an empty stretch of road, Betty's hands hovered inches from the wheel, unsure whether to trust or grab. But the car adjusted lanes perfectly. Slowed for traffic. Reacted with eerie precision. She exhaled slowly, realizing she'd been holding her breath. "So, it just drives?" she asked. Jared nodded. "Not legally full autonomy yet, but it's close. The car sees more than you or I ever could. Cameras, ultrasonic sensors, radar, neural networks processing in real time." She didn't understand all the tech, but the sensation was clear: she wasn't being left behind. She was being invited. As the car navigated a turn flawlessly, Betty felt something stir. Not excitement. Not exactly. Something deeper. Recognition. Like looking at a machine and realizing, "I get this." Not the specifics, maybe, but the logic. The purpose. She didn't need to be a coder or an engineer. She just needed to remember how it felt to chase something. To build. To learn. After the drive, Jared handed her a brochure. She wasn't ready to buy. That wasn't the point. But she thanked him, sincerely, and sat in the car for a while longer before driving home in her old Buick. The difference was staggering. Every rattle, every delay in the acceleration felt prehistoric. She didn't feel angry about it. Just, hungry. Hungry to understand more. Hungry to do something with what she was learning. That evening, she went online and signed up for 2 webinars, one on the ethics of autonomous vehicles, and one on the technology behind EV sensors. Both were free. Both scared her a little. That night she slept deeper than she had in months. Not because the world had changed. But because she had. Just a little. A glimmer. But it was enough to light the way. It was just a table at first, nothing more than a few planks of salvaged pine and some stubborn screws she'd been saving in a jar since the Clinton administration, but the act of building it turned out to be more than she expected. She cleared out the back corner of the garage, pushing aside decades of deferred decisions, the broken lawn chair, a box of Roger's records she couldn't quite donate, stacks of old Popular Mechanics magazines stained with oil and time, and set to work without ceremony, no blueprint, just instinct and memory and the need to do something with her hands. The first screw slipped. The drill bit spun out, scarring the wood. Her hands weren't as steady as they used to be. But she kept going. Not because she thought the table would be perfect, but because she needed to remember how to start something. There was no one watching, no deadline, no reward waiting on the other side. Just the quiet rhythm of work, the smell of sawdust, the scrape of sandpaper across splinters. She hummed to herself without realizing. A tune Roger used to whistle when fixing the sink. For hours she moved in and out of the garage like a tide, lost in the motion, and when she stepped back at last to look at it, wobbly-legged, uneven stained, but solid, she smiled. The table wasn't beautiful. But it was hers. That night she opened her laptop and signed up for something called the Open Vehicle Project, a small online community of engineers, tinkerers, hobbyists, and EV fanatics who wanted to build better car technology, often reverse engineering Tesla's innovations just to see if they could replicate or even improve them. It was wildly over her head. Threads full of acronyms she didn't understand, code snippets that looked like alien language, debates about LiDAR versus vision-based perception systems, references to things like vector space driving behavior prediction. But she didn't back out. Instead, she introduced herself. Screen name, WrenchBetty67. Her post was short. Hi, I'm new here. Just learning. Retired mechanic from Ohio, interested in EVs and self-driving tech. Hope to ask more than I answer, but I built my first car at 22 and I miss working with my hands. Any resources for beginners appreciated. She hit post and closed the laptop before she could second-guess herself. When she checked it the next morning, there were 12 replies. Welcoming. Encouraging. No condescension. One guy from Arizona linked to a beginner's guide to Tesla's full self-driving hardware. Another invited her to join a Zoom call on Sunday where they were dissecting recent FSD beta updates. A woman in Michigan told her, "You remind me of my grandmother, she taught me how to change my oil and always said machines speak when you learn to listen." Betty blinked hard. It had been so long since she'd felt part of something. That Sunday she joined the call. Turned her camera off at first. Just listened. The conversation flew fast. Half the time she didn't know what they were talking about. But every now and then, a phrase stuck. Neural nets learn from edge cases. Real-world driving teaches the model better than simulations. The car sees more than it understands. She wrote those down. Underlined them. That last one especially. It made her think about herself. She was seeing more than she understood. But she was still seeing. Still learning. And maybe, like those cars, she didn't have to know everything to keep moving forward. The next week she got serious. Morning started with stretches and tea, then she'd spend an hour watching lectures on AI, another hour reading about how Tesla's FSD software was evolving, and at least 30 minutes back in the garage, organizing tools, practicing simple builds. She ordered a Raspberry Pi kit, just to challenge herself. The package arrived with wires and chips and a tiny manual, all packed like treasure. She handled each piece carefully, reverently. Roger would have laughed to see her squinting over circuit diagrams like a teenager cramming for finals. Old dog, she muttered to herself, meet new trick. And she liked it. No, she loved it. It made her feel less like she was just waiting out the years. It made her feel like the clock had restarted. One afternoon, Susan called. "Hey, Mom," she said casually, "what have you been up to lately?" Betty hesitated. She wanted to lie. To say, "Oh, not much," and keep it easy. But she didn't. "Actually," she said, "I'm learning how self-driving cars work." Silence. "Wait, what?" Susan laughed, confused. Like, for real? Yeah. Watching webinars. Building stuff. I joined a project group online. Okay, Susan said slowly, is this like a class or something? No, Betty said, it's just me. I'm learning on my own. And I want to understand how the tech works. Maybe help others one day. Especially people our age. There's a lot of fear around these cars, and I think it's because people don't get how they function. More silence. Then, wow. Okay, Mom. That's cool. That's really cool. Betty could hear the skepticism under the surface, like her daughter wasn't sure if this was a phase or a coping mechanism. But she didn't care. She didn't need permission. That night she found herself drafting something, a sort of guide. Not a technical one. But something written in plain English. How Tesla's FSD works, for people who think it's magic. It started with a sentence, a self-driving car isn't a robot from the future, it's a really smart teenager with thousands of eyes, no ego, and a great memory. But it still needs supervision. She laughed at herself but kept going. 2 pages became 5. She used metaphors, drawings, even stories from her old mechanic days. By the end of the week, she turned it into a blog post and published it. She shared it with the group online. It got shared. Then reposted. Then featured on the group's front page. People messaged her saying it helped them explain FSD to their parents, to their neighbors, to themselves. A man in Oregon messaged her, saying, my mom's been terrified of these cars. I read your piece to her and she said, oh, I get it now. You're doing something important. Betty read that message 3 times. Then again the next morning. That feeling, of being useful, of making something that mattered, hit her harder than she expected. She printed the blog post and pinned it on her garage wall like a certificate. The table sat beside it, holding her Raspberry Pi setup and notes. The garage had become something again. Not storage. Not memory. A lab. A future. One night, she sat under the lamp with a pencil in her hand and asked herself, what's the next bold thing I can try? She wrote, create a workshop for seniors. Explain EVs. Explain FSD. Let them ask anything. It scared her to even see it on paper. But it also thrilled her. She didn't need to wait for someone else to do it. She could be the one. She remembered another Musk quote from a recent video, I always ask, what's the best thing I can do that others might think is impossible? Betty circled the word impossible and underlined it twice. Then she added a final line at the bottom of the page, let's build the future, one confused grandparent at a time. The flyer was simple, white background, bold black letters, and a small blue image of a car surrounded by radar waves. The title read, Curious about self-driving cars? Learn what's really going on inside a Tesla. Betty printed 10 copies at the library first, then 20 more the next day. She wasn't sure how many would care. Maybe none. But something inside her said do it anyway. Not for applause. Not for recognition. Just to prove to herself that she could. The idea had been simmering ever since she wrote that blog post. People had responded to her honesty. They liked that she didn't talk like an expert. She talked like them. Like someone trying to understand, not trying to impress. That's what made the fear even worse. Because now it wasn't just private learning. Now she was putting herself out there. As a voice. As a leader. As someone who might be worth listening to. And that scared her more than anything. She hung the flyers in places where her people went, the senior center bulletin board, the wall near the pharmacy counter at Kroger, the back hallway of the VFW where they still held Thursday bingo nights. She added a handwritten note at the bottom of each flyer. Taught by a retired mechanic who just wanted to understand the future, maybe you do too. The event was set for Tuesday at 6 p.m. in the back meeting room of the community library. Free coffee. Free cookies. No pressure. She reserved the room with a shaky voice, afraid they'd laugh. But the librarian just smiled and said, "Sounds cool. Hope it's a hit." On the day of the event, she nearly cancelled twice. Once at noon when her stomach turned with doubt, and again at 4:30 when she caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror and thought, "Who do you think you are?" She stood there for a long time, toothbrush still in hand, staring at the woman in the mirror, older, yes. But also sharper. There was something in her eyes now. A current. A voltage. Like that first second when an engine turns over and the vibration moves through your ribs. She changed her shirt, pulled on her boots, and grabbed her notes. She arrived early, setting up a folding table at the front of the room, arranging handouts she'd printed on topics like, how Tesla's cameras see the world, and, what full self-driving really means, and what it doesn't. She brought one of her old spark plugs from the charger and set it beside a little sensor she'd salvaged from a wrecked Prius. She labeled them, then and now. A physical reminder of the journey from combustion to computation. 5:50. No one. 6:01. One man shuffled in, looking around like he might have come to the wrong room. He sat in the back. Betty smiled, offered him coffee. 6:07. Two more women came in, together, whispering. Then a couple. Then a teenager with his grandfather. By 6:15, 12 chairs were filled. She waited a moment longer, heart pounding. Then she stepped up to the front and said, "Hi. I'm Betty. And I guess I'm here tonight because I got tired of hearing the word too. Too old. Too late. Too complicated. Too risky. I decided to stop listening to that voice, and maybe tonight I can help you do the same." She told them her story, not with polish or power, but plainly. How she'd spent her life under hoods and underappreciated. How she thought her time had passed. How Elon Musk's words, "People don't get left behind because of age, they get left behind because we assume they're done growing," had hit her like a lightning bolt to the soul. She saw heads nodding. Heard a few soft laughs. And when she launched into the basics of how Tesla's full self-driving system worked, explaining it like a GPS with eyes and ears and a brain made of billions of past drives, something clicked. The room leaned in. Not because she had all the answers. But because she made the questions feel worth asking. She explained neural nets like muscle memory. You ever notice how, after years of driving, your body knows a curve before you see it? That's kind of what the AI is doing, only it's learning from millions of drivers instead of just one. She showed them dashcam footage from a YouTube channel she followed, Tesla's navigating busy intersections, slowing for pedestrians, merging gently into traffic. There were mistakes. There were corrections. But there was learning. That's what mattered. After 40 minutes, she stopped and asked, "What questions do you have?" "Anything goes." The room was silent at first. Then a man in the back raised his hand. "I don't trust these things," he said, voice gruff. "I get the tech part. But what about ethics? What if the car has to choose between hitting a dog or a person?" Betty nodded. "That's real. And hard. And guess what? We're already making those choices every time we drive. We just don't think about it. Self-driving cars force us to confront that. And engineers are trying to build systems that weigh those decisions faster, smarter, and with less emotion. But it's a work in progress. It's not perfect. Yet. Another hand. "I don't like how quiet they are," said one woman. "Feels like a ghost coming up behind you." Betty smiled. "Yeah. That's valid. Actually, some EVs are adding low-speed sounds so pedestrians can hear them. And trust me, a quiet car is still safer than one that coughs oil and fails to brake on time." Laughter. Tension broke. Questions flowed. Someone asked if FSD worked in snow. Another wondered what happened if the cameras got dirty. Someone else asked if Musk was really a genius or just a lunatic with money. Betty shrugged. Maybe both. But he's not afraid to try. And that's more than most. At the end of the hour, people lingered. A few came up to thank her. One man, maybe late 70s, leaned close and said, "I used to work on Oldsmobiles. I never thought I'd be in a room talking about AI. But you made it make sense. You made it okay to be curious again." Betty smiled so hard it hurt. When the last person left, she sat down slowly, heart full and hands shaking. She'd done it. She'd stepped into the unknown. She hadn't waited for permission. She'd created a space for others to see the future not as a threat, but as an invitation. The next day she got an email from the library. "Hi Betty, several attendees asked if you'd do another session. We'd love to host if you're willing." She stared at the screen for a long time, blinking fast. Willing? She was more than willing. She was ready. The next week she scheduled another talk. Then she posted a photo on her blog, just her standing in front of that folding table, arms crossed, engine sensor in one hand, spark plug in the other, a grin on her face like she'd just outrun every too old voice that ever whispered in her ear. The caption read, "Teaching the future with hands that built the past." And beneath it, a single line from Elon Musk, "If something is important enough, you do it. Even if the odds are not in your favor." It started with a comment on her blog. Not harsh. Not cruel. But sharp enough to land like a splinter under her skin. "This is sweet, but dangerous. People like you, meaning well, but not trained, oversimplify this stuff and make it seem safer than it is. FSD isn't magic, it's still beta, and putting it in front of seniors without qualifications is reckless." The name on the comment was Dr. Henry J. Loomis. A quick search revealed he was a professor of computer science at a university in Chicago, specializing in AI ethics and autonomous systems. A real expert. His credentials were longer than a grocery list. And he'd read her blog. That alone made her stomach twist. She reread the comment 3 times. Reckless. That word sat heavy in her gut. For hours, it rolled around in her head, louder than she expected. Because somewhere beneath the excitement and progress, a small part of her had always feared she was faking it, like she'd found herself on a path meant for someone younger, smarter, more trained. That voice she thought she'd silenced came slinking back, whispering, "He's right. You're out of your depth. This is a toy to you. You'll mess it up." That night she barely slept. The next morning, she considered deleting the blog. Not the whole thing, just the post. Just that one piece of herself that felt too exposed. But instead, she brewed tea, pulled on her hoodie, and reread her own words. A self-driving car isn't a robot from the future, it's a really smart teenager with thousands of eyes, no ego, and a great memory. But it still needs supervision. She thought about that sentence. She still believed it. So she opened her laptop and wrote a response. Not defensive. Not angry. But clear. "Dr. Loomis, thank you for reading and for taking the time to share your concerns. I agree. This technology is not magic, and it's certainly not perfect. That's exactly why I created this blog. I'm not here to tell people it's ready to replace us. I'm here to help people like me, retired, curious, often ignored, understand what's changing and what's coming. Fear thrives in the dark. My goal is to shine a little light. I always encourage questions, critical thinking, and second opinions. And I'm still learning. So if you have resources you think seniors like me should be reading, I welcome them. With respect, Betty Harper." She clicked post. Sat back. Waited. The next day, his reply came. Short. Fair enough, Miss Harper. I appreciate the respectful tone. I'll send a few links I use in my lectures. Maybe they'll be helpful to your audience. She exhaled slowly. Then smiled. Not because she'd won. But because she hadn't backed down. And more importantly, he'd listened. The interaction lit something new in her. She realized she didn't need to pretend to be the expert. What people needed, what she had, was a translator. Someone who could take the high-level stuff and pull it down to earth. That was her gift. She wasn't just learning this tech for herself anymore. She was building a bridge. And bridges weren't built without a little pushback. The next workshop at the library drew 19 people. Some from neighboring towns. One drove over an hour after reading about her talk in a regional Facebook group. There was a retired bus driver with a notebook full of questions. A nurse whose husband had Parkinson's and was hoping an autonomous car might extend his independence. And a woman named Lorraine, who sat in the front row, silent, arms crossed tight. Betty could feel her skepticism like cold air. After the talk, Lorraine approached. "I'm not buying this," she said, "any of it. These cars are dangerous. One ran over a dog in Seattle. And they're tracking us, too. Cameras everywhere. I think it's all a setup." Betty didn't flinch. "I hear you," she said. "And I agree, there's a lot to be careful about. The tech's not perfect. But it's also not going away. And I figure, if we don't learn about it, we don't get a say in how it grows. So maybe we stay scared, or maybe we get smarter." Lorraine looked at her for a long time. Then nodded once. Just once. But it was enough. Betty walked home with a new sense of fire in her chest. People were waking up. Listening. Questioning. Not just about FSD or Teslas, but about their own agency. About not being sidelined. About being part of the future instead of watching it happen to them. That night she opened her garage door and stood for a long time staring at the table she'd built weeks ago. The old spark plug. The printed diagrams. Her Raspberry Pi project blinking gently in standby mode. And then, as if possessed by the surge of it all, she started drawing. Sketches. Diagrams. A simple concept for a presentation kit. Something portable. Lightweight. Designed for senior centers. Churches. Libraries. It would include physical props, model cameras, printed circuit diagrams, maybe even a small dashboard simulator. All made from simple materials. She imagined walking into a room, setting it up like a science fair, and saying, "Let me show you what's behind the curtain." She worked on it for days. Ordering parts online. Visiting the hardware store. Watching DIY tutorials. Her garage looked like a tech startup collided with a junkyard, and she loved it. One morning, mid-build, she received a phone call. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. "Hello. Hi, is this Betty Harper?" a woman's voice asked, brisk but warm. "Yes. I'm calling from an organization called Drive Tomorrow. We're a nonprofit that educates older adults about transportation technology and mobility independence. One of our regional volunteers forwarded your blog to our team. Would you be open to chatting about what you've been doing? It's very aligned with our mission." Betty blinked. "You read my blog?" "Yes, ma'am. And we loved it. Especially the line about confused grandparents. That made us laugh out loud. In a good way. We'd love to feature your story, and maybe even talk about a partnership, if you're open." Betty nodded, stunned, even though the woman couldn't see it. "I'd be honored," she said. After she hung up, she stood there, phone in hand, tears burning the corners of her eyes. She wasn't trying to build a movement. She was just trying not to disappear. But maybe, in doing that, she'd found something bigger. Not fame. Not fortune. But purpose. She thought about Roger. About how he'd used to tease her, saying, "One day you're gonna end up on the news with a wrench in one hand and a flamethrower in the other." She laughed at the memory. Maybe not the flamethrower. But the wrench? That part was true. She wiped her eyes, took a breath, and got back to building. The email came 2 weeks later, with the subject line, "Invitation to speak at Midwest Mobility Futures Summit." Betty read it 3 times before she realized it wasn't spam. It was real. The summit was a regional gathering of transportation nonprofits, city planners, senior advocates, and tech companies. And they wanted her to speak. Not as a token old lady. Not as an exhibit. But as a presenter. 20 minutes. On stage. With slides, if she wanted. The woman who emailed her, Clara from Drive Tomorrow, wrote, "We think your story humanizes the conversation in a way our attendees really need to hear. Most of them don't know what it feels like to be left behind by technology. But they need to." Betty sat in her kitchen for nearly an hour, hands wrapped around a cup of cooling coffee, heart thudding. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately. The other part, the louder part, reminded her that she'd never spoken to more than 20 people at once. That she didn't have credentials. That she'd be surrounded by professionals with polished slides and PhDs and grants. What could she possibly offer? And then she remembered something Musk had once said in a panel: "Most people wait for credentials to speak. I just start building. The world listens when the work is real." She whispered it out loud. The world listens when the work is real. She looked at the scratched-up table, the pile of workshop props, the garage wall covered in diagrams and quotes. This wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up. So she emailed back, "I'd be honored." The weeks that followed blurred into prep. She studied past summit recordings, wrote a script, scrapped it, rewrote it. She practiced standing in front of the mirror, then in her garage, then in her backyard to the trees. She timed herself. Tried to sound natural. Failed. Tried again. She wasn't aiming for TED Talk perfection. She was aiming for truth. Her slides were simple. The first was a photo of her in her mechanic's uniform from 1981, grease on her cheek, a wrench in her hand. The next slide was that same hand, 40 years older, holding a Raspberry Pi with wires like veins. "This is what learning looks like," she planned to say. Same hands. New tools. The night before the summit, she barely slept. Doubt returned in full force. What if she froze? What if she forgot everything mid-sentence? What if they looked at her like she didn't belong? But morning came anyway, and with it, resolve. She packed her props in a rolling suitcase, put on her best denim jacket, and drove the 2 hours to the event center. The building was sleek, glass and steel and perfect lines. The kind of place that felt allergic to people like her. She checked in, got a badge, Betty Harper, community technologist. She smiled at that. It didn't say retired or guest. It said technologist. She took a deep breath and walked in. The morning panels were intimidating, presentations filled with acronyms and policy talk. There were graphs, models, simulations. She understood some of it. Not all. But enough to know she was in the right room. The future was here. And she was ready to meet it. When it was her turn, she stepped backstage and waited. Her hands trembled. She thought of Roger. Of her daughter. Of the scared, stuck woman she'd been just months ago, sitting in that same kitchen, wondering if life had anything left to offer. Then her name was called. And she walked out. The lights were bright. The room was big. But the silence that fell when she stepped up to the podium was full of attention, not judgment. She clicked to her first slide. Herself, in 1981. "This was me," she said, voice steady. "First female mechanic in my shop. People thought I was crazy. Said I didn't belong. I didn't care. I loved machines." Slide 2. Her hand with the Raspberry Pi. "This is still me. Still learning. Still stubborn. Just different machines." She told them everything. About the blog. The workshops. The library talks. About why seniors felt terrified by self-driving cars. Not because they were dumb, but because they were ignored. She told them how her community didn't need more experts. It needed interpreters. People to make the tech make sense. To connect it to real fears. To real dreams. People don't stop dreaming when they retire, she said. They just stop getting invited to the future. There was silence. Then applause. Not polite. Not distant. But real. She saw heads nodding. Even the young ones. Even the suits. After the talk, they lined up. Planners. Advocates. One guy from a robotics company who said, "Your hands-on demo kit? That's genius. We'd love to help you scale it." A woman from a tech foundation asked if Betty would consider applying for a small innovation grant. "It wouldn't be a lot," she said, "but enough to help you reach more centers. Maybe train others to do what you're doing." Betty stared. Train others? The idea cracked open something new. What if this wasn't just her work? What if she could teach others, retirees, old mechanics, teachers, parents, how to do the same? What if she wasn't a one-off spark but a starter flame? On the drive home, Betty cried. Not because she was overwhelmed. But because, for the first time in years, she felt seen. Not as someone who used to matter. But someone who still did. That night she sat at her workbench, wiped the sawdust off her notebook, and wrote, "Train 10 more like me. That's the next step." She closed the notebook and whispered to the garage, "We're just getting started." The first person she trained was named Clyde. He was 73, a retired aerospace machinist with thick glasses and a voice like gravel in a coffee can. They met at a Mobility Expo booth Betty had set up through Drive Tomorrow, her portable EV demo kit laid out like a science fair project from another timeline. Clyde stood there with his arms crossed, staring down at her makeshift vision versus radar diagram made from shoebox lids and fishing line. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "You really believe this stuff's going to work?" Betty looked him in the eye and said, "No. I believe it already is working. It's just not working for us yet. That's why I'm here." Clyde blinked. Then smirked. "Tell me more." And he came back the next day. And the next. Within a week he was helping her explain perception stacks and edge case learning at a senior center 20 miles from town. At first, he stumbled over the tech terms. Called neural networks, digital guesswork. But the audience laughed, and they got it. That was the key, relating, not impressing. Betty realized Clyde had the same thing she had, a lived-in voice. Not polished, but trusted. And once he realized people actually listened when he spoke, he stood a little taller. Walked a little quicker. She made him a badge that read, "Community Futurist." He wore it every time. After Clyde came Nora. A retired elementary teacher who'd never driven on a freeway but had a sharp memory and a gentle patience. She wasn't technical. At first she was embarrassed to even try. "I never understood computers," she said. "It's all just lights and buttons to me." But when Betty asked her to read an explanation of object permanence from Tesla's AI white paper, just read it aloud, Nora paused halfway through and said, "Oh. This is like when a toddler learns that mom still exists even if she leaves the room." Betty froze. That was exactly it. A breakthrough metaphor. Simple. True. And suddenly they had a new explanation for how the car's vision system remembers objects even when temporarily obstructed. It's just a very fast toddler, Nora said with a grin. They laughed until they cried. By the end of the month, there were 6 of them. Betty called them the First Fleet. All over 65. All from different backgrounds. A former city bus driver. A retired nurse who'd once driven an ambulance. A widower who used to repair fax machines and still had ink on his fingers. Betty created a binder labeled Fleet Training Manual, version 0.1. It included everything they needed: how to run a workshop, how to set up the demo kit, how to answer common fears without sugarcoating. But more importantly, it included a letter. Typed. Signed. 1 page. She called it the permission letter. It read, "If you're holding this binder, you're not just learning. You're leading. And you have full permission to bring the future into the places that fear it. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be present. Speak plain. Speak with heart. You're not the expert. You're the bridge. And bridges don't need to sparkle. They just need to hold." They started doing monthly meetups at the library. Swapping stories. Improving each other's demos. Recording sample videos. One member suggested starting a YouTube channel. Betty cringed at first, but then she remembered Elon's old habit of posting raw test drives of Tesla's full self-driving beta, flaws and all. "Authenticity beats polish," she said. So they filmed their first video with Clyde holding a phone and Nora explaining how a vision-only system differed from radar-based approaches, using cardboard cutouts and flashlight beams. It got 412 views in the first week. Then 1,200. Then someone shared it on a tech blog with the headline, "Grandparents Breaking Down FSD Better Than Most Tech Brothers." Suddenly, they had attention. More emails came. Requests from community centers in other states. Retirement homes in Oregon. A veterans group in Texas. People were hungry for understanding. And they didn't want it from some 25-year-old in a blazer. They wanted it from someone who looked like them. Who was them? Betty felt the movement growing like a quiet wildfire. She wrote more blog posts. One titled, "We Are Not Passengers," went semi-viral. In it, she wrote, "They keep designing the future for people who haven't lived through enough past. We've seen vinyl become streaming. Wires become wireless. Landlines become satellites. We are not afraid of change. We're just tired of being uninvited." Tesla engineers started leaving anonymous comments. Supportive ones. One wrote, "We never talk to users over 60. This is helping me rethink how we frame things. Thank you." Betty printed that out and taped it to her wall. The next challenge was scaling. She couldn't be everywhere. Neither could the fleet. So she started thinking bigger. Could there be kits? Curriculum? Digital templates others could download? She started designing a workshop in a box, cheap materials, easy assembly, plain English instructions. She posted it for free online. A week later, a woman from Arizona messaged, "I built the kit. Just ran my first session with my church group. 34 people came. My hands were shaking. But I did it. Thank you for making me believe I could." That night, Betty stared at the message and felt the truth hit her like a sunrise. It was no longer just her story. It was spreading. Multiplying. Like nodes in a neural net. Each person sharing what they'd learned, slightly adapted, slightly better. It reminded her of what she'd read about Tesla's FSD system, how every mile driven contributed to the larger learning model. Each car was a teacher. Each driver, a contributor. Now, it was the same here. Every senior teaching their peers. Every fear confronted. Every laugh in a dusty rec room where the future showed up wearing bifocals and sneakers. It wasn't just education. It was data. Human data. Empathy data. Betty updated the manual. Version 0.2. Then 0.3. With each iteration came new questions. One fleet member asked, "Should we start charging for these workshops?" Betty shook her head. Not yet. Not until no one's scared to ask what a camera stack is. The vision was clear now: build a movement of empowered older adults who could speak tech in human language. Not to argue. Not to sell. But to invite. To reframe the narrative from old dogs to seasoned scouts. And always, always. To carry the torch of curiosity. One afternoon, Betty was walking home from a talk at a local Lions club when she passed by a schoolyard and stopped to watch a group of kids learning to ride bikes. One girl kept falling, knees scraped, eyes wet. But every time, she got up. Tried again. Until finally, she didn't fall. She flew. Betty smiled and whispered to herself, "That's all we're doing." Back home, she added a new quote to the garage wall. This one wasn't from Musk. It was from her own journal: "The future doesn't belong to the fearless. It belongs to those who fear, and move anyway." She underlined, "move." Then added a note beside it: "Fleet expansion, next phase, train 100 by next spring." Let's roll. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Betty sat alone at the kitchen table, the late afternoon sun slicing through the cracked blinds and casting long shadows across the stacks of papers, notebooks, and printouts sprawled in front of her. Her phone buzzed again, another message from a fleet member somewhere in Minnesota struggling to explain the difference between autopilot and full self-driving to a skeptical senior group. She sighed, fingers hovering over the screen. These days, it felt like she was less a teacher and more a fire extinguisher, putting out doubts, fears, misunderstandings everywhere the movement spread. The workshop-in-a-box kits were flying off the virtual shelves faster than she could track. Emails poured in daily, invitations to speak, requests for help, even donations from strangers who said, "Thank you for making us feel seen." But along with the growth came the weight. The weight of responsibility. The fear of failure. What if she wasn't enough? What if the movement fizzled when the novelty wore off? Betty thought back to Elon Musk's relentless energy, how he pushed forward despite setbacks, public criticism, and near bankruptcy. She reminded herself of his mantra: when something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. She repeated it like a prayer. Yet sometimes she felt like a paper boat tossed on a vast, unpredictable ocean. The tech world was a tsunami, and she was trying to swim upstream with only a flashlight. One evening, after a particularly tough day fielding questions from a frustrated city council member, she sat on the porch steps, wrapped in a faded cardigan, and let the silence settle around her. Roger's old Ford truck rumbled down the street, headlights cutting through dusk. She thought of her daughter's face in the faded photo taped to the fridge, the last time they'd spoken, a year ago, tense and distant. Had she really changed anything, or just stirred up dust? The next morning, Betty decided she needed a break. She took her bicycle, the one she hadn't ridden in years, and pedaled out toward the nearby state park. The crisp air smelled of pine and damp earth. She stopped by a bench overlooking the lake and pulled out her notebook. She wrote, "Am I building a legacy or chasing a ghost? Who am I doing this for?" As the sun rose higher, she reread the words. They felt honest, raw. But then a new thought struck her: maybe it's not about me. Maybe it's about them, the people who find courage in seeing someone like them rise, who learn because someone took the time to explain, who remember they still belong in the future. She smiled, closed the notebook, and made a quiet vow: keep going. For them. Back home, the next challenge loomed large: the annual Regional Technology Fair was inviting her to host a panel on inclusive innovation. This was bigger than the summit. Bigger than anything she'd done. She would share the stage with startup CEOs, university researchers, even a Tesla representative. Anxiety bubbled beneath her skin. Could she hold her own? Did she even belong? The day arrived in a whirl of nerves and early morning coffee. The venue was a sprawling convention center buzzing with tech demos, VR headsets, and endless conversations about AI ethics, 5G, and smart cities. Betty's panel room was modest but packed. When she stepped to the microphone, the faces in the crowd looked younger, sharper, more polished. She took a breath and told her story, her journey from feeling invisible to becoming a community catalyst. She spoke plainly about fear, hope, and learning to embrace change at any age. She quoted Musk's bold vision of a future not bound by limits. The audience listened. Questions came fast and sharp. One young entrepreneur challenged her, "Isn't this just nostalgia dressed up as innovation? How do you keep up with tech this fast?" Betty smiled. "It's not nostalgia. It's experience. We've lived through revolutions, radio to internet, horses to cars. It's not about keeping up. It's about being part of the conversation." Another skeptic asked about safety concerns with full self-driving systems. Betty acknowledged the risks openly. Fear is real. But education is the antidote. When we understand the technology, its strengths and limits, we can advocate for safer, smarter deployment. After the panel, a Tesla engineer approached her. She recognized him from the comments on her blog. "Betty," he said, "your work is changing how we think about user experience in our design meetings. The way you explain the human side of technology is invaluable. We want to help." The invitation to collaborate was both thrilling and terrifying. Could she navigate the corporate world she'd once found alien? The next weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, virtual calls with Tesla's community engagement team, brainstorming sessions with Drive Tomorrow, and workshops with the fleet. Betty found herself juggling emails, scripts, and schedules. Some nights she collapsed in bed exhausted. But the exhaustion was mingled with purpose. She started co-designing a new workshop module with Tesla engineers, one focused on demystifying the ethics and safety protocols of full self-driving technology for seniors. The engineers appreciated her perspective, she appreciated their patience with jargon. One afternoon, as she walked through her garage-turned-workshop, she caught sight of the old wrench she'd kept from her mechanic days. The metal was worn smooth from years of use. She picked it up, feeling the weight in her hand. This wrench had fixed engines, patched pipes, built trust. It reminded her that tools change, but the work remains. The work of fixing, building, connecting. Betty realized that's what she was doing, not just with cars or tech, but with people. Connecting past and future. Fear and hope. Isolation and community. Then came the unexpected, a phone call from her daughter. "Mom," the voice was tentative, "I saw your talk online. I didn't realize. I'm proud of you." The words unlocked years of distance and regret. They agreed to meet, slowly reopening a door Betty thought long shut. The movement, the work, even the doubts, they had brought her home. The chapter closed with Betty drafting an open letter to the growing network of senior tech advocates. She wrote, "We are not just passengers on this journey. We are navigators. Every question, every fear, every spark of curiosity pushes us forward. Let's keep moving, together." The future was no longer something to fear. It was something to build. And Betty was ready. Betty's mornings began with a ritual. Before the sun spilled over the horizon, she brewed a cup of coffee, sat by the window overlooking the quiet street, and read the latest news about Tesla's full self-driving updates. Each release, each algorithm tweak, felt like watching a masterful artist refining a canvas. But unlike before, she no longer felt like a mere spectator. She was part of this unfolding story. That morning, an email arrived from Tesla's community outreach manager inviting her to a live Q&A session with Elon Musk. The event was intended for Tesla owners across all ages but included a special segment focused on accessibility and inclusivity in the full self-driving program. Betty's heart raced. This was a chance not just to listen, but to ask, to challenge, to connect. On the day of the event, she logged in early, the screen flickering to life with hundreds of faces from around the country. The chat box buzzed with excitement and questions. When Elon appeared, casually seated in a minimalist office, his gaze was sharp, direct. "Thanks for joining," he began. "Our mission is to push humanity forward, accelerate the advent of sustainable transport, and make driving safer and more accessible for everyone. I want to hear from you. What barriers still exist?" Betty waited until the Q&A opened. When her turn came, her voice was steady despite the trembling she felt inside. "Elon, I'm Betty, and I work with older adults who often feel left behind by technology. Many are excited about full self-driving but intimidated by its complexity. How can Tesla better design for this group without simplifying the technology to the point of condescension?" Elon smiled, nodding thoughtfully. "Great question. The goal is intuitive interfaces that respect users' intelligence and experience. We're exploring voice commands tailored for clarity, adaptive tutorials, and community-driven support. Your work with the fleet is invaluable for informing these designs." The session flowed from there, questions about software updates, ethical decision-making, over-the-air fixes, and the role of AI in reducing accidents. Elon's answers were candid, mixing optimism with realism. When the call ended, Betty felt a surge of energy. The connection wasn't just symbolic, it was a bridge between Silicon Valley innovation and the lived realities of everyday people. Inspired, Betty shared a summary with the fleet the next day, encouraging members to prepare their own questions for upcoming events. Meanwhile, the fleet was growing. Word spread through senior centers, churches, and libraries. New recruits came from unexpected places: veterans who'd spent decades repairing radios, homemakers who'd managed decades of tech-shy grandchildren, retirees rediscovering their love of learning. Betty found herself mentoring mentors, coaching them on how to balance patience with passion, technical accuracy with empathy. One challenge kept emerging: skepticism from family members. Many of the fleet's trainees faced doubt or dismissal from their children and grandchildren who worried about safety or simply couldn't understand their enthusiasm. Betty organized a family tech night, inviting relatives to see the demos firsthand, ask questions, and witness the transformation. The event was a breakthrough. She watched as reluctant grandsons nodded in surprise when their grandmothers explained neural nets and object detection with newfound confidence. A grandson approached Betty afterward, admitting, "I didn't think Grandma would ever get this, but she's amazing." Moments like these fortified Betty's resolve. She understood that bridging generational divides was as important as bridging technological ones. She kept reminding herself of Elon's own story, how he faced skepticism, critics, and failures but pressed on because he believed in a future worth building. One afternoon, while preparing a presentation for a regional transport conference, Betty received a letter in the mail. It was from the nursing home where her mother had spent her last years. The director wrote about a program they'd launched after Betty's workshops, a group of seniors now exploring adaptive technologies with the help of young volunteers. The letter ended with a simple line: "You've given our residents hope and a voice." Betty read it twice before tears blurred the ink. That evening, she sat in her garage surrounded by the familiar hum of batteries and blinking lights on her demo kit. She thought about how far she'd come, from feeling invisible to being an advocate for thousands. The movement wasn't just about cars or tech, it was about reclaiming agency, dignity, and possibility. She jotted a note in her journal: "Transformation isn't a destination, it's a shared journey." The next few weeks were a blur of travel and talks. Betty spoke at universities, senior expos, and industry panels, always carrying the voice of the fleet and the broader community. Each appearance reminded her of the stakes. The lives behind the statistics, the dreams deferred, the fears overcome. At a Tesla innovation lab, she met engineers testing new haptic feedback systems designed to give drivers subtle physical cues about road conditions and hazards. She suggested a mode tailored for seniors, gentle vibrations instead of sharp alerts, customizable intensity, and simple, non-technical explanations. The engineers embraced the idea, eager to pilot it with the fleet. Back home, Betty coordinated the rollout, collecting feedback and fine-tuning training materials. One fleet member, Eleanor, reported that the new haptic mode made her drives less stressful, allowing her to relax and enjoy the ride for the first time in years. Moments like these were victories, but Betty also faced setbacks. Not everyone was receptive. Some community centers canceled workshops, citing budget cuts or a lack of interest. A local news story questioned whether older adults should rely on autonomous tech, framing it as risky. Betty pushed back with op-eds and social media posts, insisting on respect and inclusion. "We are not tech liabilities," she wrote. "We are tech partners." Through it all, Elon Musk remained a symbol in the background, not a savior, but a spark. Betty often replayed his words from that Q&A, designed for the edge cases, because that's where real progress happens. She believed that edge cases included people like her and the fleet members, those often overlooked by mainstream tech. As the year turned, Tesla announced a major software update with new accessibility features inspired in part by the input from senior advocates. Betty watched live streams of the rollout, heart pounding as she saw the changes come to life on her own car's interface. It was proof that a movement started in a small garage could ripple outward to influence global innovation. Late one night, she scrolled through the fleet's private forum and paused at a thread titled, "Why We Keep Going." Members shared stories of triumph and struggle, a woman who drove to her first grandchild's wedding using FSD for the entire trip, a man who rebuilt his confidence to venture out after years of fear, a couple who rekindled their marriage through shared learning. Betty felt a deep swell of gratitude. The movement was no longer just hers. It belonged to all of them. The chapter closed with Betty drafting her keynote for an upcoming international tech summit. Her theme was simple: building bridges, not barriers. She wrote, "Innovation without inclusion is incomplete. Technology must serve humanity in all its diversity, age included. Together, we are reshaping not just how we drive, but who we are in this accelerating world." As she signed off the draft, she whispered to the empty room, "This is just the beginning." Betty awoke before dawn, the familiar hum of the early morning stirring her senses. Outside, the sky was a canvas of muted grays, promising rain but not yet delivering it. Today was important, a community meeting with local officials to discuss expanding full self-driving access for seniors in her town and neighboring counties. The weight of the moment pressed on her chest, but she welcomed it. Over the past months, Betty had transformed from a solitary advocate into a resilient leader whose voice carried far beyond her small town. Still, the journey hadn't been without setbacks. The meeting was scheduled in a cramped conference room at the town hall. As she arrived, she was greeted by a mix of allies and skeptics. The local mayor, a pragmatic woman named Karen, had been cautious but open to the idea. Representatives from the state's Department of Transportation sat stiffly, arms crossed, their faces unreadable. Betty set up her presentation, a blend of statistics, heartfelt testimonials from fleet members, and live demonstrations of Tesla's full self-driving interface with the new accessibility features. She knew facts alone wouldn't win the day. This was about trust, about bridging gaps. The mayor opened the meeting. "We appreciate your work, Betty," she said. "But there are concerns: liability, infrastructure, cost. How do we ensure safety without breaking budgets?" Betty nodded, anticipating the questions. "Safety is paramount," she began. "Full self-driving technology has the potential to drastically reduce accidents caused by human error, especially for seniors who may face slower reaction times or physical challenges. The accessibility features we're advocating for make the system more intuitive and user-friendly for older adults. She clicked to a video testimonial of Eleanor, the fleet member who had regained confidence behind the wheel. Eleanor's gentle voice filled the room, recounting how FSD had restored her independence. A few officials shifted, visibly moved. But skepticism lingered. A transportation official raised the issue of emergency scenarios. How would the system handle unexpected obstacles or weather? Betty welcomed the question. Tesla's AI is continuously learning from real-world data, and the recent updates include advanced sensors and redundant systems specifically designed for challenging conditions. Moreover, human oversight remains a key component. Drivers are encouraged to stay alert and ready to intervene. Our training emphasizes this partnership between technology and user. The room grew quiet, some nodding, others scribbling notes. The mayor leaned forward. What about rural areas with limited connectivity? Betty smiled, having anticipated this challenge. Tesla's FSD uses onboard processing power to handle critical tasks locally, minimizing reliance on internet connectivity. The system is designed to work reliably even in remote regions. After nearly 2 hours of questions, concerns, and clarifications, the officials agreed to pilot an expanded access program in select communities, including Betty's town. The announcement was met with cautious optimism. As the meeting adjourned, Karen approached Betty. "You've done remarkable work. Let's keep the dialogue open." Betty exhaled deeply, the tension ebbing away. Outside, rain began to fall softly, washing the streets and the doubts away. Driving home, Betty felt the familiar thrill of possibility. But the real test lay ahead, translating policy into practice, ensuring the fleet had the resources and support to thrive. Over the next weeks, Betty and a small team coordinated training sessions, troubleshooting clinics, and community outreach events. She noticed a new dynamic emerging among the fleet members, a blend of determination, camaraderie, and occasional frustration. Technology still posed hurdles, a stubborn app glitch here, a confusing update there. Yet every obstacle became an opportunity for learning and bonding. One afternoon, Betty received a call from Martha, an 82-year-old fleet member living alone on the outskirts of town. Martha's voice trembled as she described how she'd gotten lost during a foggy drive despite relying on full self-driving. Betty listened carefully and promised to help. She arranged a visit, bringing along a technician from Tesla who specialized in adaptive user support. Together, they adjusted Martha's settings, walked through scenarios, and reassured her that learning was a process, not perfection overnight. Martha's gratitude was palpable. "I just want to keep moving forward," she said. "To feel alive again." This echoed Betty's own journey, a reminder that resilience wasn't about never falling but rising each time. At home, Betty's daughter called more frequently now. Their conversations grew less strained, filled with questions about the fleet, the tech, and even personal stories. Betty realized that sharing her mission had softened old wounds. The distance between them was shrinking. One evening, after a long day, Betty sat in her workshop surrounded by humming chargers and glowing screens. She opened a letter from a national senior advocacy group inviting her to join a task force on technology and aging. The invitation felt like a validation of everything she'd worked for, a recognition that older adults deserved a seat at the innovation table. But with recognition came new pressures. The task force meetings were held virtually, requiring long hours of preparation and diplomacy. Betty balanced these demands with local commitments and her own need for rest. There were moments of doubt, when the pace seemed relentless and the obstacles insurmountable. Yet each time, she returned to Elon Musk's example, the relentless pursuit of impossible goals, the refusal to accept "too old" or "too late" as an excuse. She remembered his words from their Q&A, "If something is important enough, you keep pushing even when the world says no." As the months passed, the fleet's network expanded beyond Betty's town, inspiring chapters in neighboring counties and eventually states. Betty helped create a digital newsletter sharing tips, stories, and tech updates, fostering a sense of global community. In one heartfelt edition, a member wrote, for the first time in years, I feel hopeful about my future on the road and beyond." Betty's heart swelled with pride. Yet she remained grounded, knowing the work was ongoing. One rainy afternoon, Betty received an unexpected call. It was from a reporter at a major news network interested in doing a feature on the intersection of aging and autonomous technology, with Betty as the centerpiece. The interview was scheduled for the next day. Nervous but prepared, Betty spent the evening rehearsing her story, focusing on the themes of empowerment, community, and innovation. The next morning, under bright studio lights, she spoke candidly about her fears, her triumphs, and the belief that technology could be a bridge, not a barrier, for older adults. The interview aired nationwide, drawing waves of support and questions from viewers. The spotlight was daunting but also an opportunity to reach millions who might feel invisible in the tech conversation. In the days that followed, messages poured in, seniors curious about joining the fleet, family members seeking advice, engineers eager to collaborate. Betty realized that her small garage project had become a movement, a beacon for those who refused to be sidelined by age or fear. The chapter closed with Betty standing beside her Tesla, watching the sunset paint the sky in streaks of gold and violet. She whispered, "This road is long, but every mile brings us closer, to connection, to hope, to the future we deserve." Betty's phone buzzed incessantly that morning. Messages from fleet members, emails from Tesla engineers, and a notification about an upcoming conference on autonomous vehicle ethics. The world felt vast and connected, yet sometimes overwhelming. Sitting in her kitchen, sunlight filtering through the curtains, she reflected on how far she'd come since that first hesitant step into Tesla's full self-driving technology. It wasn't just about cars anymore, it was about community, empowerment, and rewriting the narrative of aging in a fast-paced world. The conference was to be held in San Francisco, a city buzzing with innovation but also with skepticism about AI and automation. Betty had been invited to speak on a panel about inclusion and the human side of tech. Traveling there, she thought about the stories she'd carry with her, the triumphs and setbacks of the fleet members, the struggles to be heard, the moments of breakthrough that felt like tiny revolutions. At the conference, the atmosphere was electric. Bright banners proclaimed the future of mobility, while attendees in sleek suits debated the promise and peril of self-driving cars. Betty's session was scheduled late in the afternoon. She arrived early, soaking in the energy but reminding herself to stay grounded. When her turn came, she took the stage with calm determination. "Good afternoon," she began, voice steady. "I'm here not just as a user of technology, but as a representative of a community often overlooked, the older adults who want to remain active, independent, and engaged in a changing world." She shared stories of fleet members learning new software, conquering fear, and forging connections across generations. She spoke of the resistance they faced, from family doubts to societal stereotypes, and the resilience required to push through. "Elon Musk often talks about solving problems that matter," Betty continued. "For us, it's not just about innovation for innovation's sake, but innovation that includes all of us, regardless of age." The audience listened, some nodding, others taking notes. Questions followed, about safety, about accessibility, about balancing human control with machine autonomy. Betty answered with honesty, acknowledging ongoing challenges while highlighting the breakthroughs the fleet had helped inspire. After the panel, a young engineer approached her. "Your work is incredible," he said. "We're developing new user interfaces and your insights are exactly what we need." They exchanged contact info, sparking a collaboration that would soon yield new training tools tailored for older drivers. Outside, Betty mingled with other advocates and tech leaders. The conversations ranged from policy reforms to grassroots education efforts. She realized the change she envisioned required partnerships at every level, from CEOs to city planners to everyday drivers. That night, at a small cafe with fellow panelists, Betty shared her vision. "It's about dignity," she said quietly. "About giving people permission to grow, to adapt, to dream again." A fellow panelist, a researcher focused on AI ethics, nodded thoughtfully. And that requires listening, truly listening, to those who feel left behind. Returning home, Betty found a message from her daughter waiting, a text with a photo of her son learning to drive, paired with a note, "Thanks for inspiring us all." Betty smiled, feeling the gap between generations narrowing. She responded with a simple, heartfelt reply, "Keep pushing forward." Over the coming weeks, Betty helped coordinate a pilot program partnering with local driving schools to integrate full self-driving training with traditional driver education, specifically targeting seniors. The initiative gained traction, drawing media attention and funding. As the fleet expanded, Betty noticed a shift, not just in skills but in attitudes. Members spoke proudly about mastering complex tech, about mentoring peers, about reclaiming agency. They were no longer defined by age but by action. One evening, Betty received a call from Tesla's design team. They wanted her input on a new dashboard interface prototype emphasizing simplicity and customization for users with varying needs. Betty organized focus groups, inviting fleet members to test and provide feedback. The sessions were lively, filled with humor and candid critiques. Members suggested larger fonts, voice commands with natural language, and alerts that didn't overwhelm. The engineers listened, iterated, and thanked Betty for bridging the gap between Silicon Valley and Main Street. Meanwhile, Betty's personal life blossomed. Her relationship with her daughter grew warmer, their conversations richer and more frequent. Betty's renewed confidence and purpose had softened old tensions, opening pathways to understanding. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Betty and her daughter took a leisurely drive using the full self-driving system. Watching the road pass by, Betty felt a profound sense of peace. This wasn't just technology, it was freedom. Freedom from fear, from isolation, from doubt. That night, as she reflected on her journey, Betty realized the power of small choices compounded over time. Choosing to learn, to teach, to connect. She thought about Elon Musk's willingness to challenge the status quo and how that courage had ignited her own. The chapter closed with Betty drafting a letter to the fleet, urging members to embrace their role as pioneers. "We are driving change together," she wrote. "Not just on the roads, but in hearts and minds everywhere." Betty sat quietly in her favorite chair, a warm blanket draped over her knees, the soft glow of her Tesla's dashboard illuminating the room. The car was parked in her driveway, but it was more than just a vehicle, it had become a symbol of her journey, a testament to resilience and change. Her mind wandered back to the early days when she first hesitated to even touch the touchscreen, overwhelmed by the idea that technology had passed her by. Now, she was among the leading voices advocating for seniors in the autonomous vehicle revolution. The phone rang, jolting her from her reverie. It was Mark, a Tesla software engineer with whom she had developed a close friendship over months of collaboration. "Betty," he said excitedly, "we've just rolled out a new beta update for full self-driving. It's designed to improve decision-making in complex urban environments. Crosswalks, school zones, unpredictable pedestrians. I'd love for you and the fleet to test it and give feedback." Betty's heart raced. This was exactly the kind of innovation that could further empower seniors to feel safe and confident behind the wheel. She thanked Mark and immediately began planning a testing schedule with the fleet members. Over the next few weeks, the fleet became a hive of activity. Betty coordinated virtual meetings where members shared their experiences navigating the new software, successes, glitches, moments of surprise. The stories poured in, Eleanor describing how the car smoothly stopped for a child chasing a ball into the street, George marveling at the improved handling of cyclists weaving through traffic, Martha reporting a glitch where the car hesitated at a four-way stop, prompting valuable feedback for the engineers. Betty recorded every detail, channeling the collective wisdom of the group back to Tesla's development team. The partnership felt unprecedented, a true collaboration bridging generations and disciplines. One afternoon, Betty drove to a local community center to host a workshop introducing the new FSD features to seniors who had yet to join the fleet. The room buzzed with curiosity and apprehension. Many attendees admitted they'd been wary of autonomous technology, fearing loss of control or confusion. Betty shared her own story candidly, her fears, mistakes, and eventual breakthroughs. She emphasized that technology was a tool, not a replacement for human spirit. "We're not giving up our independence," she told them, "we're enhancing it." Hands hesitantly rose when she invited questions. An older man named Harold shared his concerns about sudden changes in software causing unfamiliar behaviors. Betty nodded empathetically. "That's why we advocate for clear communication from Tesla. Updates should be predictable, optional, and accompanied by thorough training." The conversation deepened, touching on topics of privacy, data security, and the ethics of machine decision-making. Betty encouraged open dialogue, fostering an environment where fears could be acknowledged and addressed. The workshop ended with several participants signing up to join the fleet, eager to embark on their own journeys. Meanwhile, Betty's outreach had caught the attention of a regional transportation authority interested in pilot programs integrating full self-driving cars with public transit for seniors. They invited Betty to consult on accessibility and community engagement. Traveling to the city's planning office, she was struck by the challenge, and opportunity, of designing systems that worked seamlessly across private and public mobility. In meetings with planners, engineers, and policy makers, Betty advocated for user-centric design. Interfaces that accounted for sensory limitations, customizable alerts, and flexible modes tailored to individual comfort levels. She emphasized the importance of education and support networks to ensure adoption didn't leave anyone behind. As plans took shape, Betty realized the movement was evolving from grassroots advocacy to systemic transformation. Yet, the road was not without bumps. Media outlets occasionally highlighted accidents involving autonomous vehicles, sparking debates about safety and liability. Betty addressed these concerns head-on in interviews and public talks, stressing that while technology was not perfect, it was improving rapidly and offered the best path toward reducing human error. She reminded audiences that progress required patience and collective commitment. At home, Betty's relationship with her family deepened further. Her daughter invited her to a weekend getaway, a chance to relax and reconnect. During the trip, Betty marveled at how their conversations had shifted from cautious curiosity to enthusiastic support. Her grandson even asked to sit in the passenger seat during a drive, fascinated by the car's self-driving features. The moment was a quiet victory, a bridge between generations built on shared experience. One evening, as Betty reviewed emails from the fleet, she noticed a message from a member in a neighboring state who had been inspired to start their own local group. The network was blossoming beyond anything she'd imagined. She penned a thoughtful reply, encouraging them to lean into community and continuous learning. Reflecting on the journey, Betty felt a profound sense of purpose and gratitude. She thought back to Elon Musk's philosophy, fearlessness in the face of uncertainty, embracing failure as a step toward mastery. She had lived that philosophy, transforming fear into action and invisibility into voice. The chapter closed with Betty driving her Tesla through twilight streets, the car's headlights cutting through the dusk. The road ahead was still winding and uncertain, but for the first time, she felt fully equipped to navigate it, not alone, but together with a community empowered by technology and bound by shared hope. Betty sat in her living room, the soft hum of her Tesla parked outside barely audible through the window. The past months had been a whirlwind of progress and learning, yet at the heart of it all was the connection. The bonds forged between the fleet members, the engineers, and even the wider community. Betty reflected on the countless phone calls, video chats, and face-to-face meetings that had transformed a small group of hesitant seniors into a vibrant movement. The idea that technology could isolate people was being challenged daily by their shared experiences. A message popped up on her tablet from Martha, who had recently overcome her driving anxiety thanks to the latest full self-driving update. "Betty," the message read, "I drove to the grocery store alone yesterday. For the first time in years, I felt free. Thank you for believing in me." Betty's eyes welled with tears. This was the real impact, restored independence, rekindled hope. Later that week, Betty coordinated a "Connect and Drive" event at the local community center. It was designed to bring fleet members together, celebrate their successes, and share stories. As she watched members arrive, some walking with canes, others arriving in assistive scooters, Betty felt the energy of a family reunited around a shared purpose. Tables were set up with laptops displaying the latest Tesla software demos. Volunteers offered one-on-one support, answering questions and helping with setups. New members listened intently as veterans shared tips and reassurances. The air buzzed with laughter, encouragement, and the occasional nervous chuckle at technological glitches. Betty gave a short speech, her voice filled with warmth. "We started as individuals, uncertain and sometimes afraid. But together, we're a force. We're proving that age is not a barrier but a strength. That technology, when designed with heart, can open doors instead of closing them." The room erupted in applause, a testament to the collective spirit. After the event, Betty received an unexpected invitation to speak at a national conference on aging and technology. The honor was immense, but so was the pressure. She spent nights crafting her speech, determined to represent not just herself but the countless seniors navigating this new frontier. On the day of the conference, Betty took the stage in a grand auditorium filled with policymakers, tech innovators, and advocacy groups. She spoke passionately about the journey of the fleet, the challenges faced, and the triumphs achieved. When Elon Musk said, "Some people don't like change, but you need to embrace change if the alternative is disaster," I took those words to heart. Our disaster was the slow fading of independence, the quiet sidelining of our voices. But embracing change means reclaiming our lives, 1 mile at a time. Her speech struck a chord. Questions poured in afterward, about accessibility, safety, and how to scale these initiatives nationwide. Betty emphasized collaboration, urging stakeholders to listen to older adults, to involve them in design and policy decisions. Back home, Betty found renewed energy in the responses. A nonprofit reached out, proposing a partnership to provide subsidized Tesla vehicles equipped with full self-driving for low-income seniors. Another organization offered to fund mobile training units that could travel to rural areas. The movement was growing beyond a single town or state, it was becoming a national force. Yet, Betty remained mindful of the road ahead. Not every story was one of triumph. She remembered Harold, who had struggled with sudden system updates and had nearly given up driving altogether. Betty visited him personally, helping to tailor his settings and offering patient encouragement. Slowly, Harold regained confidence. These moments reminded her that progress was not always linear, it required patience, empathy, and relentless support. One evening, Betty sat by the window, watching as headlights traced ribbons through the quiet streets. She thought of the countless seniors now driving with newfound assurance, navigating roads and life with renewed purpose. Elon Musk's vision of pushing boundaries and defying limits had ignited something far greater than technology alone, it had sparked a movement of human connection, resilience, and hope. The chapter closed with Betty drafting a letter to the fleet. "Remember, every connection we make, every story we share, builds the road ahead. Together, we drive change not just in our cars, but in our lives." Betty sat behind the wheel of her Tesla, the dashboard softly glowing as the sun dipped below the horizon. Despite all the progress, moments of doubt still crept in like shadows. She knew the road to transformation wasn't smooth, there were challenges ahead that even Elon Musk's visionary boldness hadn't fully conquered. The latest full self-driving update promised improved performance but also brought a surge of mixed reviews and headlines warning about autonomous tech glitches. Betty felt the weight of those headlines, not just for herself but for the entire fleet community she had nurtured. The skepticism from family, friends, and the public at large sometimes seemed overwhelming. One evening, after a lengthy call with Tesla engineers troubleshooting a software bug that had caused her friend George to hesitate abruptly in traffic, Betty wondered, was this journey worth the struggle? But then she remembered Elon's words from a recent interview, "Failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough." That mindset was the spark that kept her moving forward. Determined to tackle the challenges head-on, Betty organized a Roadblocks and Solutions virtual workshop with fleet members and Tesla's support team. The goal was simple but ambitious: openly discuss problems, share solutions, and bridge the gap between users and developers. As members logged in from across the country, Betty welcomed them warmly. "We're not just users, we're partners in innovation. Our experiences matter because they shape the future of technology." One by one, fleet members shared their stories about software updates that confused the system, moments of uncertainty when the car hesitated unexpectedly, and the anxiety those glitches caused. Betty listened carefully, validating their feelings while encouraging constructive feedback. Tesla engineers explained the complexities behind each update and the rigorous testing underway to ensure safety. The conversation was honest and, at times, intense. But it also cultivated trust. Together, they brainstormed ideas: better user communication about updates, optional training modules with each software release, and an emergency override system to enhance driver confidence. The session ended on a hopeful note, a shared commitment to persistence and partnership. Outside the virtual space, Betty's advocacy attracted the attention of a national consumer protection group concerned about autonomous vehicle regulations. They invited her to join a panel discussion focused on safety standards and transparency. Preparing for the panel, Betty dove deep into technical reports and regulatory frameworks, determined to speak with both heart and knowledge. On stage, she balanced advocacy with realism. Autonomous technology holds immense promise, especially for older adults seeking independence. But we must demand accountability, clear communication, and rigorous safety standards. Innovation without responsibility leaves no one behind. Her words resonated, earning respect from policymakers and technologists alike. Back home, Betty faced personal challenges as well. Her daughter voiced concerns about relying too heavily on technology. "Mom, what if the system fails? What if it's not safe?" Betty understood the worry. It was the same fear she'd grappled with. She reassured her daughter by explaining the layers of safety built into Tesla's system and emphasized that drivers remained engaged and in control. Gradually, her daughter's apprehension softened, replaced by curiosity and even pride in her mother's pioneering spirit. One weekend, Betty took her grandson for a drive, showing him the full self-driving features in action. Watching his eyes widen as the car navigated smoothly through traffic, she felt a surge of hope. The future wasn't just hers, it belonged to generations yet to come. Still, the path wasn't without setbacks. A regional news outlet ran a sensational story about an accident involving an autonomous vehicle, sparking public debate and renewed scrutiny. Betty responded by writing an op-ed, calmly explaining the facts, the safety protocols, and the ongoing improvements. She highlighted how human error accounted for the vast majority of accidents and how autonomous systems aim to reduce those risks. The article sparked thoughtful dialogue rather than fear. The chapter closed with Betty reflecting on the nature of progress. Like any revolution, the path to full autonomy was messy and imperfect. But with courage, community, and relentless commitment to learning, the roadblocks could become stepping stones. As she looked out over the quiet neighborhood streets, Betty felt ready to face whatever came next, because she was no longer alone. She was part of something bigger, a movement driving not just cars, but change itself. Betty's mornings had taken on a new rhythm. Instead of waking to the silence of an empty house, she now found herself sharing breakfast with her grandson, Ethan, who had recently turned 16. The boy was curious about everything, from Tesla's electric engines to Elon Musk's vision of Mars colonization. Watching Ethan navigate the sleek touchscreen in the Tesla, Betty felt a bridge forming between generations, a connection built not just on family ties but on shared wonder at technology's possibilities. Ethan had been eager to learn to drive, but Betty had a new perspective on what driving meant in the age of full self-driving tech. She explained to him how the system wasn't about removing human responsibility but enhancing safety and freedom. "It's like having a co-pilot who's always alert," she said, "but you're still in charge." Over breakfast, they discussed the fears and excitement surrounding autonomous vehicles. Ethan admitted he worried about losing the thrill of driving, but Betty assured him that the joy came from the journey itself, whether manual or assisted. Inspired, Ethan began documenting their drives, recording videos explaining how Tesla's FSD worked, and sharing their experiences on social media. His youthful enthusiasm attracted viewers of all ages, sparking conversations far beyond their small town. Betty marveled at how the technology was not only transforming her life but also reshaping what it meant to grow up in a world where driving was evolving. One weekend, they attended a local Future of Mobility expo. The event showcased everything from electric scooters to flying taxis, but the centerpiece was Tesla's latest model equipped with full self-driving beta. At the exhibit, Betty was invited to speak about her journey, emphasizing the importance of inclusion across generations. Technology isn't just for the young or the tech-savvy, she told the crowd. It's for anyone willing to learn, adapt, and embrace the possibilities. After her talk, a group of high school students approached, eager to learn more. They shared their own dreams of working in tech, inspired by visionaries like Elon Musk. Betty encouraged them to think about how innovation could solve real-world problems and reminded them that empathy and connection were just as vital as coding skills. Ethan and Betty's partnership soon evolved into a collaborative project, a vlog series where they interviewed fleet members, engineers, and young innovators. The series explored challenges, breakthroughs, and personal stories, weaving a tapestry of human experience centered around the technology that was redefining mobility. Through their work, Betty witnessed a shift, not just in her own family but in the broader community. Conversations about aging, independence, and technology grew more nuanced and hopeful. Betty's daughter, once skeptical, became an advocate, helping to organize workshops and support groups. Local schools integrated sessions on autonomous vehicles, fostering early awareness and understanding. Yet, Betty also recognized the importance of balance. She reminded Ethan that no technology should replace genuine human connection or the joy found in simple moments. Together, they took leisurely drives without engaging full self-driving, savoring the feel of the wheel and the open road. One afternoon, while parked by a lakeside, Betty shared a letter she had written to Elon Musk, thanking him not only for the technology but for inspiring generations to dream beyond limits. He reminded me that age is not a cage, she told Ethan, but a call to keep moving forward. The chapter closed with a scene of Betty and Ethan driving home as the sun set, the Tesla smoothly navigating winding roads. In that moment, the future felt alive, brimming with possibility, connection, and a new generation ready to steer the journey ahead. Betty stood at the edge of the community park, watching a group of seniors gathered around a shiny new Tesla Model 3 equipped with the latest full self-driving technology. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting a warm golden light over the scene. She felt a deep sense of pride and purpose. Just a year ago, this gathering would have seemed impossible, a group of people her age, eager to explore cutting-edge technology together, challenging the notion that aging meant retreat. The park was alive with curiosity and laughter. Eleanor, once hesitant to trust autonomous driving, was now confidently demonstrating the car's features, explaining how it handled complex intersections and pedestrian crossings. George talked animatedly about his experience using the new voice commands that made controlling the car more accessible. Betty smiled as she listened. Their stories were not just about technology, they were about reclaiming agency, dignity, and freedom. In recent months, Betty had become a regional ambassador for senior mobility, speaking at events, advising policymakers, and consulting with Tesla engineers. She carried Elon Musk's fearless mindset with her, the idea that to embrace the future meant to face uncertainty head-on, with curiosity and resilience. During a recent trip to Tesla's Fremont factory, Betty had witnessed firsthand the dedication behind every innovation. Walking the assembly lines, meeting engineers and technicians passionate about sustainable transportation, she felt connected to a larger mission, one that transcended age, background, and experience. Betty's own journey mirrored the company's ethos, relentless pursuit of progress, learning from failure, and daring to imagine what others deemed impossible. Yet, she was keenly aware that embracing the future fearlessly did not mean ignoring real concerns. Questions about data privacy, cybersecurity, and the ethical implications of autonomous decision-making were on everyone's minds. Betty made it her mission to advocate for transparency and inclusion in these discussions. She collaborated with tech ethicists, community leaders, and legal experts to ensure that the voices of older adults were heard and respected. In a recent panel discussion, Betty shared her perspective: technology should serve humanity, not overwhelm it. We must build systems that respect our values, our safety, and our right to understand how decisions are made. Outside the formal arenas, Betty found strength in everyday moments. She recalled a quiet afternoon when her grandson Ethan helped her update the Tesla's software, patiently explaining new features and walking her through settings. The experience was more than technical, it was a bond forged across generations, a symbol of shared learning and mutual respect. Betty also reflected on her daughter's evolving attitude. From skepticism to cautious optimism to active involvement, her family's transformation was a microcosm of the broader societal shift. At home, Betty often repeated Elon Musk's mantra: if something's important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. This mantra had carried her through self-doubt, technical challenges, and societal resistance. One evening, as she prepared for a community talk, Betty glanced at a framed quote Elon had shared on social media: when Henry Ford made cheap, reliable cars, people said, "Nah, what's wrong with a horse?" That was a huge bet he made, and it worked. The analogy resonated deeply. Just as the automobile once revolutionized mobility, full self-driving technology had the potential to redefine independence for millions of seniors. Betty's talk was a heartfelt call to action. She urged her audience to embrace change not with fear but with curiosity and courage. She emphasized the power of community, how learning and growing together could transform not just individuals but entire generations. As questions flowed after her speech, Betty listened with empathy and honesty, acknowledging fears while sharing stories of triumph. She invited participants to join local groups, engage with developers, and become advocates themselves. The chapter closed with Betty driving home under a starlit sky, the Tesla effortlessly navigating quiet streets. In the hum of the electric motor and the steady glow of the dashboard, she felt a profound sense of connection to the technology, the community, and the future. Embracing the future fearlessly was not just about technology, it was about a mindset, a commitment to growth and resilience that transcended age. Betty was living proof that it was never too late to change, to dream, and to lead. Betty sat quietly in her favorite armchair, the soft glow of the evening lamp casting long shadows across the room. Outside, the familiar hum of Tesla vehicles gliding down the streets reminded her how much had changed since she first hesitated to trust full self-driving technology. Now, as she approached her 70th birthday, Betty felt a profound sense of peace. She had not only reclaimed her independence but had become a beacon of hope for others like her. The journey had been anything but easy, marked by moments of doubt, frustration, and fear. Yet, through it all, one truth had anchored her: the future belonged to those brave enough to embrace change. Betty reflected on the countless fleet members she had met along the way, each with their own story of struggle and transformation. Eleanor, who learned to drive again after a stroke; George, who found joy in spontaneous road trips; Martha, who rebuilt bridges with her estranged daughter through shared drives. Their stories intertwined to form a legacy far greater than any single individual. It was a legacy of resilience, courage, and connection. Betty's mind wandered back to the letter she had sent Elon Musk years ago, an expression of gratitude for the technology that had sparked this revolution and for the inspiration his vision had given her. Though Elon was a larger-than-life figure, Betty had come to see him as a symbol, a reminder that limits were often self-imposed and that innovation was born from the courage to defy them. The world was changing fast. Electric vehicles were no longer a niche market but a mainstream reality. Cities adapted to accommodate autonomous fleets, and new policies prioritized sustainability and accessibility. Yet, Betty knew the true revolution was in the hearts and minds of people, especially those who had once felt sidelined by time. One afternoon, Betty received a call from a local university inviting her to speak to a class of engineering students. They wanted to hear firsthand about the user experience of older adults navigating new technology. Preparing for the talk, Betty thought deeply about the lessons she wished to impart. She wanted to emphasize empathy, how technology designed without understanding the human element was destined to fail. On the day of the lecture, Betty stood before a packed auditorium. She began by sharing her personal journey, weaving stories of fear, hope, and discovery. Innovation, she told the students, is not just about circuits and code. It's about people, their dreams, fears, and everyday lives. If you build technology that listens, adapts, and includes, you create something truly transformative. The students were engaged, their questions insightful and thoughtful. Betty felt a surge of optimism. These were the minds that would shape tomorrow's world. After the lecture, a young woman approached, her eyes bright with passion. "Thank you for reminding us that our work has real impact," she said. "I want to design tech that makes a difference, especially for people like your generation." Betty smiled, feeling the baton pass to the next generation of changemakers. Beyond the classroom, Betty continued her advocacy. She collaborated with policymakers to draft guidelines ensuring that autonomous vehicle technology remains safe, inclusive, and transparent. Her voice carried the weight of lived experience, bridging the gap between engineers and end users. One evening, at a community celebration marking the 10th anniversary of the Fleet Initiative, Betty was honored with an award recognizing her leadership. As she accepted the accolade, she looked out at the faces, young and old, curious and determined, and felt the depth of her journey. "I was never too old," she said, her voice steady and warm. "I was just waiting for permission to matter again. And today, I give that permission to all of you." The room erupted in applause, a chorus of hope and affirmation. The chapter closed with Betty writing the final entry in her journal, a testament to transformation. "This is not the end," she wrote, "but the beginning of a legacy that will continue to inspire. We have proven that age is not a limit, but a launch pad. That with courage, connection, and technology, we can rewrite our stories. Here's to the roads ahead." As she set the pen down, Betty felt a quiet satisfaction. The revolution Elon Musk had ignited with Tesla's full self-driving tech was not just about cars, it was about people reclaiming their lives, their purpose, and their futures. And that legacy would endure long after the roads had been traveled. Betty sat behind the wheel of her Tesla one last time before sunset, the soft hum of the electric motor soothing her as she prepared for a symbolic journey. This drive was more than a trip through familiar streets, it was a celebration of everything she had learned, endured, and transformed since first encountering Tesla's full self-driving technology. The world around her had shifted, roads now bristled with sleek electric vehicles, cities adapted for autonomous fleets, and communities once isolated now connected by the promise of new mobility. But more importantly, Betty herself had changed. She was no longer the hesitant, doubtful woman who had feared that age meant invisibility or irrelevance. She had become a pioneer, a mentor, and a symbol of what was possible when courage met opportunity. The memories of her journey played like a vivid film in her mind. The lonely mornings, the skeptical glances, the late-night troubleshooting calls with engineers, and the exhilarating first drives where trust in the machine met the thrill of freedom. She remembered her grandson Ethan's wide eyes, her daughter's gradual acceptance, and the fleet community's unwavering support. Each moment was a stitch in the tapestry of her transformation. As she eased onto the road, the Tesla's full self-driving system engaged seamlessly, navigating the winding streets with precision. Betty felt a serene confidence, not a surrender to technology, but a partnership. The car was her ally, enhancing her independence without replacing her will. Along the way, she passed familiar landmarks, the community center where she had hosted workshops, the park where seniors had first gathered to explore new mobility, the local school where she had spoken about the future. Each place echoed with stories of growth and connection. As twilight deepened, Betty found herself reflecting on Elon Musk's enduring influence, not just as an innovator, but as a symbol of fearless change. His willingness to challenge norms, embrace failure, and dream big had sparked a revolution that reached far beyond technology. It was a revolution of mindset and possibility. Betty recalled one of Elon's quotes that had resonated deeply: "Some people don't like change, but you need to embrace change if the alternative is disaster." She had embraced change, not blindly, but thoughtfully, with resilience and hope. At a quiet overlook, Betty paused and stepped out. The view stretched wide, the horizon glowing with the promise of tomorrow. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool evening air fill her lungs. In that moment, she understood that the journey was never truly over. There would always be new challenges to face, new horizons to explore, new dreams to chase. The technology would continue evolving, communities would grow, and generations would rise with their own stories of transformation. But the most profound lesson was hers to keep, that life was a continuous journey of learning and growth, no matter one's age. As she re-entered the Tesla and resumed driving, Betty felt a profound gratitude, for the technology that had opened doors, for the community that had lifted her, and for the courage she had found within herself. She knew that her story was one of many, a beacon lighting the way for those who might feel lost or left behind. The future, she realized, was not a destination but a horizon, always just ahead, inviting all who dared to move forward. The chapter, and the story, ended with Betty's quiet promise to herself and others: "I was never too old to change. I was never too old to dream. And I will keep driving forward, as long as the road stretches out before me." In that simple vow lay the true revolution. The power to redefine what it means to age, to live, and to embrace the future with open arms. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?